since we're talking about times and dates, and it goes hand in hand with, I think, his general concept or feeling about music and art. He didn't fit into a category. He wasn't identified with a certain school and then it was over and he was history. He had such a broad concept of things that you couldn't put him in a time element or a category.
I viewed it as a cult following, more or less. I hate to use that word because it's a derogatory term at times, but it was this underground. If you were a great player and a great musician, you knew about Dennis. Yeah. And if you weren't, then you know.
And I know I was really proud of studying with him, and that was it. You were a Sandole guy or something.
Now let's touch on this. Dennis wasn't for everybody either. There are some people that would not fit into his approach for whatever reason. Correct?
You know, you had to be disciplined. You had to be a self-motivator. He wasn't going to hound you to get your work done. You had to be willing to do it, and without, on your own. You had to really have the desire because it was so challenging. You couldn't keep
and it
up.
wasn't like you went in and had a half-hour lesson and it was time. I mean, mine were like 10 minutes, and was that the average?
Well, but the point was, and I always tell everybody this, you might stay in his office for 10 minutes, but then you had 6 hours a day worth of work to do. And I think what's really, in hindsight, because we've all lived through, most of us are educators now too, is just since his time, or as jazz teaching has become an industry, a big industry now, and in one sense he sort of invented it, and really did it maybe better than, from my point of view, better than anybody or any program, because you were getting, just by going there in that so-called 10 minutes. You were getting you were getting theory, you were getting ear training, you were getting technique on your instrument, you were getting improvisational materials, you were getting compositional materials, and probably a few more aspects of it. And I think it's that art of teaching. I think it's I don't know. You can't. If people aren't, if you haven't experienced that, you really don't understand what that relationship between a teacher and a student can be. Because people go to lessons, they say, well, I like what this person teaches. I like, he said, he was like a doctor. He said he's not. You don't go in and tell him, well, I want to work on playing like Coltrane or something like that. Which is, I think now people pick. I want to play real fast. So I'm gonna study with some instrumentalist who's known to play fast, or I want to. Some particular aspect of things, where he was dealing in, musical ideas, musical thought, and just like you said, putting barbells on your ears and expanding your conception, and then you apply it in a unique way. But I think in one sense, as much as jazz teaching has expanded, it's really sort of shrunk because of the not being able to find or develop people like that, although I'm sure everybody here is doing great jobs.
And everybody sounded different. You would listen to a
Right.
number of students and they would all sound
Be different, right.
Yeah, he really developed individuality. That's exactly
Which is really
what
it's about. I mean, it really is. And Joe?
When you talked about the briefness of the lessons, the point also is the fact that you were expected to go in there and just play them right off. You were not going to fidget with the page. Let me see, did I do this? And he wasn't there to watch you practice. So when you did, as Scott said, when you did your 4 hours a day, 7 days a week, no days off, went in there, you're going to fly through those things. And that's what I'm sure everyone did. And the other point on that 4 hours a day is the fact that as a jazz improviser, people forget that it's done on the spot. So you have to be able, your reflexes have to be so sharp. And if you're not training them at home, lightning's not going to strike on the bandstand. So that 4 hours a day over a period of years, you'll get to know your instrument well, and you won't have to fish around as to how to play something or where it can be played, because that's where those hours start to pay off. And that's what people don't realize, that your instincts are developed by doing that kind of hours. And that's another reason he got the results. He didn't want students, you couldn't accomplish anything in just an hour a day or 2 hours a day. And even if you had the lesson done after the first day, you still woodshedded it the other 6, and that's what made the player. That's the difference between a player that can just play these things right off and someone that's fumbling away or has to write out this and that with the solo.
Could you go back to your lessons now, say the first year of lessons, and redo them again and still spend 4 to 6 hours on them?
I still practice my stuff. In fact, I photocopied a buddy of mine who's a pianist that studied with him, and I remember I went to Kinko's and copied. They were tired of me there. You know, I just camped out hours and hours a day and copied everything. I practiced them every day.
You do. I have a funny story. I sent away for a transcription years ago in the back of a magazine. It was a Jeff Beck transcription. And I get them, and they were handwritten. And at the back of them were about 20 of Dennis's lessons just thrown in there for some reason. So I thought, these are Dennis's lessons. Look at this.
Well, you came this road.
So strange.
Recognize the handwriting.
It's so funny. It came with the, yeah. But any other stories, anecdotes, anything on Dennis?
Just about his, in the 50s he did the guitar album that was finally released a couple of years ago. I don't know why they waited 50 years to do this. And then the same with the brothers Sandole. That was released though. The story on the guitar recording as to why it wasn't released, the company said, well, the problem is that the other guitar players can't duplicate it. So I mean, they said, well, so we're not going to release it. It's not for public consumption apparently. But if you listen to either of those 2 recordings today, the guitar album or the instrumental album called The Brothers Sandole, they're still ahead of their time. And the guitar playing, what people don't realize, it's if you bought the recordings, you're not listening to hear somebody. Dennis can play the guitar marvelously, believe me. But the guitar album is not about him flying up and down doing things that were never, technically. It's about jazz guitar, a conception of jazz guitar playing that's never been touched yet. And that's the thing that's interesting about it. It's a feel, it's a sound, it's everything different, as with those recordings. And they're still waiting. They still should be played. People should be hearing those.
Yeah. And he also left us with Guitar Lore, the book too, right? And which is available in print.
Yes.
But that's more guitaristic, isn't it? And with scales and things.
To teach guitar lore, guitar lore is not meant to be going through from cover to cover. What you have to do is divide the book up into sections. For instance, like if you're teaching a guitar student, you could start with the tremolo and finger exercises and then take something from the scales and something from another section. But then you do have to add on to that because you do need to teach a student how to read. And Dennis had me doing Wolfhart and then Bach, and then he encouraged me, he said, you should keep up your reading, and he mentioned the Kreutzer studies and so forth. But guitar lore should be used in conjunction with something else, the application material, like jazz pieces in different positions so that you can apply what you studied to the instrument, how to do melody and chords, how to do chord voicings in sequences and so forth. So it covers a certain amount of material, but it should be worked. You have to bring in other material to make it a complete musical study for a guitar student.
One thing I remember about Dennis is the fees for his lessons, being who he was ridiculously low.
What was it?
It was crazy.
But what was even crazier was that he would never ask you for your fee.
No.
And I don't think anybody today could imagine running a business like that. He would have on his piano, you were supposed to leave the money next where the keys ended, and at that spot there used to be like a 3x5 card where people would have IOU, and the guys would, people would have
They would all be in debt.
tons of money that they were in debt to him. And then if you didn't write down you didn't leave money, didn't leave IOU, he would never, because I remember one time I forgot or something, and he never would discuss money. And it wasn't an affectation or something. He really didn't want that to be an obstacle because they were different. I was raising kids while I was studying with him, and he knew I was struggling, and there was points where I said I can't really do it now, and he would say I don't want this to be an obstacle. I mean, I think after 20 years, he said, we're finally getting somewhere, so I don't want to, I don't want to impede our momentum here. So if you can't afford, pay what you can. And I'm sure that wasn't not something that was unique to me. I mean, he cared so much, and it was somehow, I guess, his faith as a human being in life itself, was going to get him through it. But when his relationship with money was not like any other person.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think that just carried over in his daily routine? Didn't care about money?
I guess Joe can answer that probably better than us.
Did he pay you rent, Joe?
Dennis, he knew what he was doing financially. He helped a lot of students. He helped a lot of us when we needed it and let things pass. But I know he was on top of things. I mean, his bills were paid. He wasn't the absent-minded genius or anything like that. I mean, he knew exactly where everything went, and he was extremely responsible. But towards the students, with the students, he was really lenient if things were difficult for us.
Okay. Prior to Dennis being known as a teacher, can anybody here tell me about his performing and his history as a performer?
What I know is, and again, you couldn't pull it out of Dennis. Al White told me that story about how Dennis first started to perform, and then sometime later, he got a contract he was with the Dorsey's band, and he got a contract and was working in Hollywood, and he is in some of those movies, I think the Mickey Bruni, Judy Garland movies or something. You can see him in some of those. I know he had a workshop and played there. When he moved back to Philadelphia, he was playing, there was a clarinet player, had a club, then he had one down the shore. I can't think of his name. It was on Manning Street, I believe, or one of those little streets.
Right off of,
Yeah, what was the name of that place?
But he used to play there occasionally, and I think the pianist was Ray Bryant. Is that who that?
Yeah.
Yeah, Ray Bryant is a marvelous jazz pianist, and Dennis played there. I know. When I met him and started studying in the late 50s, he was not performing in Philadelphia that I knew of, and I got the impression he may have been doing a little bit of playing with the workshop in New York, but I don't think he played out from the late 50s or that I recall.
There's one, a couple of recordings with Charlie Barnett that are available.
Really?
So yeah,
What's that?
where they play. There's one where they play one of his arrangements. I think Dark
Bayou.
Bayou.
Dark Bayou.
Yeah.
With the Charlie Barnett band. You can still get that. I have that.
Really? Okay.
And also, I guess he played. Didn't he play with Boyd Rayburn?
Yeah, he was Boyd Rayburn's band too. When he lived in California, I know, Bob, my discussions with the Buddy DeFranco, the clarinetist who I had worked with later on, worked with Dennis in California. They did a lot of things together out there. So I know Dennis was very active when he was in L.A. During the time he spent there.
And one of his friends, Joe Scrow, who's in the neighborhood, still among us,
Still living,
was out in L.A., I think. Wasn't he with Dennis, or am I misspeaking?
No.
about
I think Joe
that?
stayed in Philly.
Joe stayed in Philadelphia the whole time, as far
he
as I
did?
know.
But
Oh,
Joe
okay,
was
I
like
thought
the
he was a
top guitar
studio.
player in Philly at one time. He was doing all the work.
Right, and they were friends, and some students, if they could, you had to be Hercules to do this, would study off of Joe and then go to Dennis. And how do you do that?
And the thing that was amazing is we had the two finest guitarists in the world probably teaching in Philadelphia.
Philadelphia at the same
Yeah.
time.
When I
Within a few blocks of each other.
Yeah,
What is it with Philadelphia?
when I went out to Las Vegas and I was playing in some orchestra, it was a jazz orchestra, one of the guitar players came up to me and says, "You must be from Philadelphia." And his line was, he goes, if I wasn't working, I would move there. He said, because all the players that come out of there are players, because it was amazing.
I heard the same thing. There was one story that I remember. I met somebody at the studio that went to Boston to study at a school. And he had studied with Dennis for a little bit, maybe not even a year, went up to Boston to go to school for a guitar. And I think it might have been John Laporta was up there and said to him, "Hey, kid, he goes, you sound pretty good." He goes, where are you from? Philadelphia. He goes, I studied with Dennis Sandole for a little bit, then I came to school. And supposedly John said to him, "You're insane. Move back to Philadelphia." My advice is quit. And he did. He quit and he went back and resumed his studies.
Yeah. I imagine if he were alive today with the